When you are shooting video, you will quickly notice there's a difference in shutter speed from still photography to video. The shutter speeds are the same, but not how we choose to use them for action. There's a lot of action going on here. If we were shooting in still photography, we would have to consider our shutter speed choice to stop the action. Or we might decide to show blurred action using a slow shutter speed. So I might shoot at a wide aperture with a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second to stop the action seen here. Or I might try something different, such as a shutter speed of 1/10th of a second to show a motion blur and give a feeling of movement in that way. I can't do either of these on normal video. First, remember that video is shot at 30 frames per second. If you divide 1 second by 30, you get 1/30th of a second, which means that 1/30th of a second is the slowest possible shutter speed for video. Now, on some cameras, you can set a very high shutter speed, so you may think that there's no limit there. But remember the 30 frames per second. If you shot 30 frames at 1/130th of a second, you end up with an entire second filled with images. There would be no gaps between each frame. Suppose then you shot at 1/1000th of a second. The total time used would be 30 thousandths of a second for those 30 frames, leaving 970 thousandths, almost the entire second, completely blank. This causes a huge gap between each frame, causing the video to stutter or chatter. Our eyes are not capable of creating smooth motion with that gap, and so the action will look unnatural. Let's take a look at what this looks like for video. I've shot these basketball players at 1/30th of a second. See how smooth the action looks? It looks like normal video. Now let's shoot the same basketball players at 1/1000th of a second. Notice how chattery or stuttering the action looks. This does not look normal for video. You could use this for special effects, but this is not the usual look for video. Since it is possible to shoot at such high shutter speeds, photographers will use them for special effects. It can give a very interesting and unusual look for action. In addition, a high shutter speed with video is important if you want to look at still frames from that video. Network Sports will set up a special camera for freeze frames that shoots at a very high shutter speed, just so they can go back and freeze the action. If you wanted to check the details of the shooter's form, you would have to shoot at a very high shutter speed. But normally for video, you will be choosing a shutter speed between 1/30th and 1/90th of a second. Some video purists feel that the ideal shutter speed is 2 times the frame rate. So if you were shooting 30 frames per second, you would shoot at a 1/60th of a second. We could shoot these basketball players at 1/30th, 1/60th, 1/90th of a second and see what we get, but that'd be a waste of time. You won't see much difference. I've also found that you can get away with shutter speeds as high as 1/125th of a second if the motion is not that fast. So one thing to remember when shooting on video is that you are limited in your choice of shutter speed from approximately 1/30th to 1/90th of a second, and occasionally all the way up to 1/125th of a second. Shutter speed choice is definitely a different thing to consider with video versus still photography. The speeds may be the same, the results are not.